So after you've submitted your geofilter, and if it happens to be rejected, there are a few things that you can do to resubmit to get it accepted. Now, on the right side, we have our on-demand geofilter rejection. And the good thing about on-demand geofilters and their rejection is that you actually get an explanation of what you did wrong and what you can do to fix it. So in this example, it says your geofilter is not approved, and then it gives an explanation. It says your geofilter was not approved. We're sorry, but this geofilter's design covers too much of the screen. Remember, Snapchatters want to be able to see the snap behind the geofilter's design. Please adjust your design to free up some screen space, and then try resubmitting your geofilter. And then it also says that your method of payment will not be charged, and if you have any other questions, to reach out by replying to that email. Next on the left is our community geofilter rejection, and you'll just get an email saying that your geofilter was not able to be accepted, and then they'll give you several possible reasons why your geofilter was rejected. And now this can be a little bit more tricky to figure out what you did wrong and what you can do to fix it. However, I'm going to give you a few options or ideas to think about when resubmitting your geofilter. So first, if you feel like your design fits all the requirements, there's a few things you can do to resubmit it without redesigning it. And the first is to adjust your geofence, because many times a geofence that is too broad or not relevant to the area will be rejected. So you can tighten up your geofence to be a little more specific. This is exactly what happened with my Sac State geofilter, as it was rejected for having too broad of a geofence, so I tightened it up a little bit without changing anything of the design and keeping relatively the same submission notes, and it was accepted the second time. The second thing you could do is provide a more detailed description of why the location is meaningful to you. After taking a look at several people's rejected geofilters, I found several people didn't take enough time to explain the parts of the design that related to their community and explain that in their submission notes. I found this out because I looked at their geofilter and it wasn't making too much sense to me why they included certain things, and then I asked them what it meant. They told me what it meant, and then I asked them if they included that in their submission notes. They went on to say that they didn't, and if it wasn't clear to me, it's most likely not going to be clear to the person reviewing your geofilter. You want to take the time to fully explain every part of your design to make sure that there's no confusion of what the meaning of your geofilter is and how it relates back to the community. Now for slight modifications, you can first start off with whether your geofilter is correctly formatted. Make sure that your geofilter file is a 1080 pixel wide by a 1920 pixel tall box, and to make sure that the geofilter file isn't too huge, such as being over 300 kilobytes. Next is to make sure that your geofilter is exported on a background that is transparent. Now, even if you submitted it as a PNG, that may not mean that your geofilter is transparent. So just to make sure, you need to make sure that there's no color, such as white or black or some other color, in the transparent section, and then when you export it, just make sure that the transparency is selected. And if you need a refresher on how to do this, you can revisit the digitizing module where we cover that. Next is to make sure that your geofilter content doesn't include any copyrighted material and that all of your graphics are 100% original. This includes any logos, trademarks, and even school crests that aren't submitted by authorized school staff. So just be aware of this, and to get rid of all that information and to make something that is more original if it happens to be something that is copyrighted. And finally, if you've double checked everything else, then it may just come down to the fact that your geofilter isn't considered visually interesting or useful. And in order to fix this, it's likely going to take a partial or complete redesign of your geofilter in order to make it more visually interesting or useful. Now, a good place to start over is in the planning module. And as I mentioned in that module, it's very important to make sure that your planning and the design of your geofilter is good, because it's going to get rid of a lot of the mistakes and errors later on that's going to be a lot more time intensive. So if you haven't finished the planning and designing modules in this course, then I highly suggest starting over from that point. However, if you've already finished it, I would suggest going back and revisiting some of those videos to make sure you have a better grasp on it, and then spend even more time actually sketching out your concepts and refining your design before digitizing it. Now I'm saying this from experience because as I spent more time in the planning and designing phase of my geofilters, the less rejections I got. For example, my first community geofilter, I spent about 10 hours planning and designing it, and it was rejected twice. My second community geofilter, I spent a few days planning and designing it, and it was rejected once. And my most recent community geofilter, I spent about a week and a half planning and designing it, and it was accepted on the first try. Now it may sound like a lot of work, but what's better? Spending a week on the design and then getting it accepted on the first try, or just spending a few hours and then getting it rejected several times and having to do all that work later on? On top of that, even if it does happen to get rejected after all that work, it's more likely going to be an easy fix to that submission by one of the easier methods rather than a complete redesign. So now that you have a better idea of how you can resubmit your geofilter after it's been rejected, in the next lesson, we're going to cover how you can attract clients to you for Snapchat geofilters.